Welcome to Feminine Sexual Healing, the leading edge of personal growth and development. I'm your host, Amrita Grace.
I know you're scared to be yourself sometimes. This world can be so blind. But if you take the chance to trust, start to open up.
Hello and welcome to Feminine Sexual Healing. My name is Amrita Grace, and I'm the co-founder and director of the Sacred Feminine Mystery School and the award-winning, best-selling author of Reclaiming Aphrodite, The Journey to Sexual Wholeness. I am here with the beautiful Crystaline Randazzo, a woman for whom I have so much respect and admiration and love. Today we're going to talk about the connection between women having a voice and having access to their sexual life force energy. This is a big subject. Crystaline is part media maker and part story magician. She's dedicated to understanding the human experience one story at a time. With more than 15 years of experience as a filmmaker, photographer, writer, editor, and strategic storyteller, she specializes in helping women find their authentic voices. By blending the art of storytelling with somatic safety and personal transformation, Crystaline guides women in writing books, developing genuine brands, and gaining insight into themselves through the power of narrative. Welcome, Crystaline.
Thank you, Amrita. I'm so excited to be here and to just hold space with you for this subject. It feels really important right now.
It does, and I love how you phrase that, holding space, because that certainly is a gift that we both have and that we want to bring to others. And I've always seen this podcast as a sacred space. I am honored to be together with you in this sacred space.
Beautiful.
So I'd like to start by inviting you to share a bit about your own story and how you came to be supporting women in finding their authentic voices.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to share that. So, me, like most people, I was shaped by the stories that I grew up with. And most of those stories came to me through the Bible because I grew up in a very conservative, patriarchal religion. I feel like early on I was diving into that story of the Bible, and what I was looking for in the pages was myself. I was trying to find parts of that book that showed me what a woman should be, what a girl should be. And what I found there were women like Eve. She was courageous in her quest for knowledge. In fact, she was punished and exiled from paradise because she wanted to know things. And I was like that. I wanted to know things. You know, I had so many questions within me, so much curiosity. I looked at stories like Lot's wife, whose love led her to glance back at the place she called home, only to be transformed into a pillar of salt. She was punished for loving, for having community, for having needs that were outside of what the authorities said she needed to have. And even when I looked for the positive stories, what I found in that Bible were books or stories of Ruth, who sacrificed everything, her religion, her home, to follow her husband, or Esther, who had to use her beauty to save her people, or Mary, who had to give up her only son. It felt to me like the only stories of women that I saw from that whole period of my life were women choosing between a rock and a hard place. It seemed to me that a woman's role, what I was taught a woman was supposed to be through just my very basic life experience and from Sunday school, was we were supposed to be selfless. We were supposed to have a servant's heart. In contrast, the men in the Bible were often depicted as powerful leaders who were supported by God, even when they made questionable choices. And all of that reinforced a certain unfairness that I felt powerfully as a little girl. I was a sensitive little soul, and I could interpret these stories even from an early age. And what I saw was that I wasn't represented in those pages. When I was about 11, my mom came to me and said, "We're really worried about you because you haven't chosen this faith as a path." And I looked her right in the eyes and I told her, I can't serve a God like that. I just can't. It's not in me. And the following years of growing up in that religion were pretty damaging. Every week, at least 3 times a week, I was publicly asked to change my mind in front of my community, my friends, my peers. And when I was 16, I was sent to a boot camp, which was actually run by former church members who were former military. And I was sent to a reconversion. I mean, it was essentially a reconversion camp. But even that didn't change my mind. I had such conviction that I wasn't in the pages of that story. And when I was 18, I left that church for good. And sometimes I think that in leaving, I experienced the expulsion that Eve must have felt, that Lot's wife must have felt, that Ruth must have felt, this separation from my family, my community, everything that I ever knew. But the only thing that was harder than leaving was staying in a place that didn't have room for me as a leader, who didn't have room for my voice, for my experience. And 24 years later, I'm still on a journey to reclaim my spiritual sovereignty, which is part of what led me to your work. And my dream is to cultivate the power not only of women's voices, but of anyone who struggles to see themselves in the narratives that they were given, or who maybe feel like they have no power or autonomy in how their stories have been told. That's what leads me on in this work. It's not just stories, it's the people behind them.
Wow, I just want to take a moment to just be with how powerful that story is, and to really admire how even at 11 you knew, and you stood up to the people all around you. That had to be a tremendous amount of pressure. I really admire that because I didn't have that kind of courage as a kid. And I just had to hide. I hid. So you didn't hide. And I just feel so proud of you for sticking with your convictions and for standing up and speaking. What an incredible journey you've had. And that makes you incredibly qualified to be doing what you're doing, to be teaching what you're teaching, and to be supporting women in the way that you do. Whew. What keeps women from telling their stories, Crystaline?
Well, many things, I think. What I see that comes up over and over again for women in telling their stories is this feeling of not enoughness. My story's not important. I have nothing to say. Nobody would care about that if I talked about it. Sometimes it comes in a slightly different variation, which is I'm too much. I'm dramatic. People say I make too big of a deal of things. There's a healthy dose of people-pleasing that keeps women from stepping forward. I think we've been told to sacrifice, that's what makes a good woman. If we work hard and keep our head down and help everybody, right? That's how we'll get to where we're going, not if we step into positions of leadership. I think the other thing that really keeps us from telling our story is just some good old-fashioned trauma. There are stories that we don't want to return to because they were so deeply painful for us. there are stories that when we have tried to tell them in the past, we weren't believed. And there are stories that even if we do tell them and people seem to understand, we have a big bodily response to them that leads us to shut down for weeks or months or years after speaking them out loud. You mentioned, Amrita, you hid. And I think that we all hide in some ways. I spoke out in my community, but I was also still trying to conform, right? I was trying to show that I was good even though I wasn't making these choices. And when it comes to storytelling, I feel like it's very similar. Sometimes we're trying so hard to be who we're supposed to be. It's easier to hide, or it's easier to tell a version of a story that other people find palatable.
It comes down to, I think I can encapsulate that in women don't feel safe telling their stories.
Absolutely.
There's not safe space for them. So what can we do to create that safety and ensure that they do feel safe enough to tell their stories?
Well, I think that's your and I's work, right?
Indeed.
Our work is to try to cultivate spaces that are safer. And I say safer because I don't believe there are 100% safe spaces. And even if there are safer spaces, we still have to live in a world that sometimes is not safe. Yeah. So I feel like the way that we do that is by holding the space for women to come together. And in my case, what I do is I create these spaces where they can practice telling their stories so they can figure them out for themselves in spaces of women before they go out in the public and just put it everywhere. I also incorporate systems of care before, during, and after so that we're caring for the nervous system. We live in this world that's like, put it out on Instagram, tell your deepest secrets, tell all. And then we have to live in these bodies that are like, that made me unsafe again. So the way I do that is just through small practice sessions of stories so you can feel whether the story is safe for you or what you need for the story to be safe for you. Mm-hmm. I'd be really curious to hear how you cultivate safety in your spaces, because I feel like this is something we hold in common in our work together.
Yeah, most definitely. And boy, that's a big question. And I think it's an ever-evolving answer. Certainly for me, realizing last year that I needed to get more trauma-informed care training, that especially since COVID, there's more trauma than ever coming up. It's like, to create safety for that, I think number one thing for me is that I need to feel safe in my own body. I need to be regulated in my nervous system to the best of my abilities. And I need to be grounded and really solid in who I am to be able to hold space for others. And I really believe that sacred spaces are co-created. So as a teacher and a facilitator, the first line of that, the first foundation of that is my responsibility. Then I also include all the participants in creating the sacred space and the safe space with me. I think that gives a degree of not only self-responsibility, but that knowing that we are responsible for ourselves and we can rely on ourselves. It's not about me doing this for you. It's about me helping you empower yourself, and that we're all in this together.
Yeah, I love that. It's like the idea of building capacity for our individual needs while we live in a collective, right? Because a workshop is a collective, or the greater world is a collective. And so there are certain things that each individual will need, but we have to know what we need in order to cultivate that, which I think is very difficult for many women. And a key part of this discussion, which is how do we cultivate safety for ourselves when we don't know what that looks like? And how do we get clear on what safe means for us?
That is indeed an ongoing process.
It feels like that. It feels like an evolution for me as well. I learn something new with every new person I work with about what it means to cultivate safety and allyship and witnessing for other people. I would really like to also sort of take this beyond safety and storytelling and into our own sexual pleasure, our sexual needs. How do we access that when it feels separate for many of us, especially those of us who kind of came up in this religious tone that said that's all bad and wrong.
Yeah.
Unless you're married, then you can flip the switch, and
then you can flip the switch.
Then it's okay.
Right, exactly. One of the things that's been on my mind lately is this is just such an overlay, and even beyond that religious upbringing, it's just an overlay in our whole planet. And it's persisted for eons. And I'm really kind of tired of it and would like to see it being on its way out, because what it does is it drives sexuality underground. And what we know from history back to the beginning of time is that that's not really effective. People are going to find their way to sexual connection just based on their human impulses. Like this is the procreative drive, but even beyond that, the drive for connection and pleasure and deep intimacy. This is just part of our human nature. We can't put that in a box, and we can't push it underground. I've always thought of it as like if you're in a pool and you've got a beach ball and you're trying to hold it underwater. You can't do it for very long. Eventually it's going to pop out of the water, and it's probably going to smack somebody in the face. So this idea that, especially for women, that we're supposed to be pure and non-sexual until but we're also supposed to be beautiful and sexy. It makes things a little bit crazy, and it puts a lot of pressure on women, and it also heaps a lot of shame on women. And I think that shame is one of the primary things that needs space held for it to emerge and be processed out of the body, because it just all gets stuffed and held in the body. And all that does is create issues in the body. It creates emotional issues. It creates physical issues. It creates dis-ease and illness. And there's got to be a way where we can safely access and release these feelings, especially the shame, and just layer by layer until it's current.
Yeah. Oof. And that beach ball image is just with me. Right? It's just, this is what it feels like. I'm a prime example of what happens when you hold somebody down, tell them, you need to hold everything in. And I held it in for a really long time, right? Even though I spoke out in the church and any of that, I was a good girl. I was good. I might have been being rebellious by not conforming, but I was good in every other way. I was one of those girls who went to a Christian college. I didn't have sex until I met my husband. I did all the things I was supposed to do. And then when I got married, I did have sex before marriage, so technically not everything. But when I got married, I was supposed to check, now you're a sexual being. But I had all that religious shame piled on top of me. So even though I love my husband and my partner and, wanted to be with him, I couldn't access that part of me, which is ultimately what led me to your work. I mean, it led me to lots of other things too, therapy and many things, but I ended up basically on your doorstep because I was like, there's something wrong with me. I am broken. I have tried everything, and I just can't access that part of myself.
It's interesting. I had a similar experience too, which is what eventually led me to this work. Years and years of therapy, my background being a little bit different in that I didn't have that religious upbringing, but I was sexually abused as a child, and physically and emotionally as well. So that's what I was carrying. And all that therapy and my first two marriages and all of that, it didn't get sorted. But when I finally found my way to sexual healing, I said, oh, this is it. This is what the missing piece is. It all has to be very underground because it's an unregulated field. And that's something that's a little bit crazy, I think, and hopefully will be changing in the coming years, that this is a respectable profession, this profession of sexual healing and helping women heal from sexual wounding, because we've all got it. It's that focus on healing the shame that I think can make a really big difference for women, no matter what their background is, because we all carry it. It's all the way back to Eve, right? It's handed down generation after generation from our foremothers all the way back to Eve.
Yeah. And we have to live in these bodies, right?
Look, we get to.
We get to live in these bodies, right? So to be able to access what I call our wholeness, because I do feel like that's the reintegration journey. And I don't know if this is helpful, but I kind of laugh now when I think about when I came to your work. It was almost like, well, maybe this thing will give me that easy button, that I'm I'm looking for. And then I'll be a sexual being. And that's all progressive. But as much as your work is about sexual healing, I think there's so much confusion when we talk about sex, because people just think it's the act. When the truth is, sex, our sexual desires, our desires in general feel all interrelated. What do we want? What kind of life do we want to make for ourselves? Where does our creativity live, and how is it expressed? What is our power in our voice, which is connected in the throat and in the yoni, if we're looking at the body? If we don't have access to the yoni, we probably don't have access to the throat. And this feels like something that nobody's talking about. And what I see often in my work, which is connected to your work, because what I'm seeing is this symptom of women being totally shut down, the fear of speaking. And I had that myself when I mean, it's really funny that I'm teaching storytelling and visibility, because for me, getting up in public, I get red, I get blotchy, it comes up, you know what I mean? It's like somebody has their hands here. And that's what I see in the women that I work with. And I think there's this direct line between the throat and the yoni that we're not addressing, that if we're shut down here, we're also shut down there, right? We're closing off our creativity and power from below.
Very much
and that's
so.
impacting us.
This is one of the things that I've been talking about a lot lately, is what we think of as sexual energy that we think is only for the act of sex is really our life force energy. It's our creative energy. It's what gives us passion for life. And it's stored in our pelvic region. And it's often very, very shut down in our pelvic region. And this is something we're simply not taught. So it's something that we get to learn now, hopefully. You mentioned the connection between the yoni and the throat, and that comes back to the vagus nerve, which is something that's just becoming more and more known in the public eye, I think, is the connection between the brain and the pelvis through the vagus nerve that goes to all of our organs. And there's a lot going on there. So yes, I completely agree that in order to get access to your voice, you've got to get access to your life force energy, to your sexual energy, not to then all of a sudden just become this sex crazed person. That's not what it's about. It's about really accessing the energy that enlivens us, that animates our bodies, and that keeps us young. I mean, I kind of come to see this as a fountain of youth and vitality. Here I am, 61 years old, feeling like I'm about 40 or younger. And I really credit this access to all the energy that's in my body, that's in my pelvis, and also the incredible blessing of being able to support women in finding their own access to this energy. It's an incredible blessing, and it's our birthright. We've just not been taught this, or we've been taught something completely different. And it's not accurate. This is what's real. This is what we're here for, to be all the way in these bodies and to feel everything our bodies have to offer, including the God-Goddess given sexuality and sexual pleasure that is also our birthright.
Yeah. I mean, before I came to your work, that was so far away from me. Like I just couldn't touch that. It felt like a long, long road to go. And what I can say for anybody who's listening to this podcast is that I was a wee bit terrified to go to Amrita's workshop, but I also knew I needed to go. I had read every word of that website. I knew exactly what I was going to go and do. And yet I just was like, I know that this is the thing I need. And that is that intuitive knowing that feels connected to that creative life force, that inner drive that told me, this is your next step. This is what's important to your healing and wholeness and self-sovereignty. And it's led me many places since then. I've been to 2 of your workshops. And I feel more and more settled in my own body, in my own knowing. It is about sex and pleasure, but it's more about wholeness. And I feel like that's something that's not always conveyed. We come looking for the quick sex fix because that's what we're told we need. There's something wrong with us versus we have women's bodies and we need things done in a certain way that we actually need to understand ourselves before we can expect somebody else to give those things to us. I wish I could articulate what this work has done for me, and also how it stretched me to grow even in my own work of understanding of somatics and safety, because your work had an integral part of that within my work. Mm-hmm. So I just want to share my appreciation with you that this is not work that many people are doing, but it's work that women need.
Thank you. Thank you. I fully receive that. And I agree. It's work that women need. Women especially, everybody needs it, but women especially. And for me, because I was already ordained as a priestess for some years before I came into the work of sexual healing, I always knew that it needed to have a sacred overlay. And that was part of what creates the safety. But what it also needed for me is it needed to go very much into the realm of the feminine, because there's so much in our world that with the masculine overlay of fast and active, and there's nothing wrong with the masculine principle. It's very necessary. But what we need as feminine beings and feminine bodies is a slower, more integrative approach to wholeness. We need to be able to feel ourselves, our bodies, our emotions, and have a safe space in which to express them. We need feminine community and sisterhood. And we really need to feel supported and safe in doing this work. And that's why a long time ago, I chose to work only with women in groups, especially. And even though my training was mixed gender, that carried its own set of challenges, certainly for me. And I think for others as well. It just brings a different dynamic. So the feminine way is one of the things that's been really important to me to bring into this work. And that's also been a process, because we're all learning how to do that, how to be that.
Yeah, which is feminine in and of itself, right? To not have the answers, but to be willing to flow with answers as they come, and not to always have to be right or to know. I think that's so beautifully said, and I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful that I was able to access this work. I'm so grateful for the ritual of this. I have to admit, when I signed up, I was like, I don't know about this priestess stuff, but the sex stuff I need. You know what I mean? But as soon as I was in the priestess stuff, I thought, oh, this ritual is powerful and old. And this is work that women have been doing for each other forever. We just forgot how.
They just forgot how, exactly. And the fact that you were called to come to Glastonbury 2 years in a row and had the opportunity to experience that particular magic and that ancient feminine energy, I think really adds a whole nother dimension to the experience. And I'm just delighted that you're going to be back with us again this year in a slightly different capacity, but with us nonetheless. Feel very blessed. Is there anything more that you would like to add in closing?
I think I just want to say that if you're a woman who has felt silenced or disconnected from herself, her body, her knowing, that there are ways back to yourself. And those ways are not through a process or a workshop or whatever. The way back to yourself is by listening to the internal voice within that tells you the next right best step for you. And it took me such a long time to return to that voice, and there have been many modalities that help me trust it, but I think that self-trust is what women need right now. And when we learn to trust ourselves, we can trust our voice. And when we can trust our voice, we can speak. And when we speak, others hear us, and they hear the call to come back to themselves too. I believe that that's the work that you and I are doing together in different capacities and different modalities, but just calling women back to themselves. And I'm so grateful to have you as a teacher and a friend. And I look forward to seeing where we both go from here.
Beautifully, beautifully said. That says it all and sums everything up beautifully. This is about women coming back to themselves, trusting themselves, listening to themselves, and knowing that the answers are within, because we carry so much wisdom through our ancestors, through our lifetimes, and through our willingness to be the spiritual beings that we already are, to tune into that aspect of ourselves and let that guide us. Beautifully said. Thank you so much. Really grateful to have you as a guest today, Crystaline, and that I'll be seeing you in just a few weeks. And I just really want to encourage you all who are listening to get on Crystaline's email list so you can be notified of her amazing gifts and offers that she has available. This is a woman with mad skills and who is also, like me, a lifelong learner and continues to find more and better ways to be of support to women. So, of course, I will include her website in the show notes and ways to get in touch with her. And thank you so much for listening today. Thank you very much, Crystaline, for being with me.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
I see the light.